Imagine this. You're going about your life when suddenly all these people you know and people you've worked with start contacting you. They say there's a woman who is making a very public allegation of rape against a famous man and that you have information that could help support her claim. And you're like, wait, what? They say that they're learning about this from all these news reports, and those news reports are based on a book that is selling a ton of copies, becoming hugely successful. While the book and the reports are not using your name, they are describing you. It can only be you. And the people contacting you assume this must be true because the author of the book said that it was fact-checked. Except no one ever contacted you. If they had, you would have told them that this thing that allegedly happened didn't happen. This whole thing sounds so surreal, right? Well, this can happen to you. And we know that because of what did happen. Several years ago, amid the Me Too movement, Ronan Farrow came out with a book called Catch and Kill. It recounted his alleged experiences trying to break stories about Harvey Weinstein, and then it turned to Matt Lauer, former host of The Today Show on NBC. The mainstream media went wild with that. There were thousands of reports about what Matt Lauer did based on what Ronan Farrow was saying, treating Farrow's every word from the book and his interviews about the book when he talked about Matt Lauer as gospel. But then something else happened that you probably never heard about. Eventually, Matt Lauer fact-checked him. All right, that right there is so crazy that we need to talk about it today. But it wasn't just Matt Lauer. A website that was willing to take a look did the same thing and found big holes in Ronan Farrow's reporting. Finally, one person at one major news agency did a piece acknowledging at least some of that. It wasn't just Ronan Farrow. Other news agencies failed to fact-check claims that they heard. And to this day, giant mainstream media have false reports just sitting there for everyone to see, including one that a very respected news outlet called perhaps the single most horrifying detail. They didn't bother to find out that that detail is false. Ahead, you'll hear from someone who played an instrumental role in exposing all this.
This story, among many others, is the perfect proof that the news media is completely broken and that narratives that are popular or that create fear, and this one created a lot of fear and create perverse self-interest within the media itself, are never going to get debunked.
This story gets at crucial issues in the media. It's about how victim narratives have supplanted a search for truth. It's about how even someone you want to dislike can get something right, and someone you want to like can get something wrong. Journalists have to be willing to take a dispassionate look and find out. It's about a crucial rule of fact-checking, which I'll discuss ahead. It's especially important in a case like this. It also gets at something called Youngism, and it's about perhaps the biggest fact-checking failure of all in today's media ecosystem: books that are supposed to be nonfiction. How journalistic failure gets rewarded in our society and what we can do about it, coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. In this era, there are so many people competing for your attention and spreading lies like wildfire. When you come here, the goal is to get you truth. I'm so grateful to everybody who is joining me in this effort. For those of you who are new, hi, I'm Josh Lives, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. You can learn about me and my history and all that stuff at my website, joshlevs.com. Along with this podcast comes a newsletter. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. You will see lots of links and other stuff there. You can find a direct link to it in the show notes or at the website. And if you're on something called Substack, you can just look me up there. The newsletter is free, but the people doing the most to support this show are paid subscribers to the newsletter. They get additional content. I've been sending out some transcripts to them. There's a chance for paid subscribers to meet me. And I'm so happy to say more and more people have been joining us as paid subscribers. Judy Simon wrote, "I like the fact that you are holding the mainstream media to task. I'm looking for a trusted source to help vet the news articles I choose to read. because there are so many, and I'm not capable of fact checking everything on my own. Exactly, Judy. Thank you. There's one here from Pam. She writes, I appreciate your straightforward approach. Thank you so much. Another one, Betsy Wilco. She heard about this show through The Contrarian. I do columns there. And she wrote that she cares deeply about actual facts. Thank you to them and to so many other people. We have a big topic to dig into today, so let's jump right in. News agencies are supposed to take responsibility for what they get wrong. They don't, obviously. As I've made clear on this show, these news agencies have tons of things wrong and they don't take responsibility for it. But it's even worse with nonfiction books. The way deals with authors are structured, the company will sell you a book that they are calling nonfiction, but they say it's entirely up to the author to make sure it actually is nonfiction. News organizations then interview the authors of these books and run op-eds from them and quote them as though what they are saying is true without fact-checking what these people are saying. They assume the fact that it's in a book makes it true, even though it very much doesn't. Ronan Farrow's book was called Catch and Kill. As I mentioned, it focused largely on what he claims were his experiences trying to break the Weinstein story, and then it turns to Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer was a host of NBC's Today Show. He was fired from NBC in 2017 when he admitted to having a sexual relationship with a woman who worked inside the company. He acknowledges that they had encounters, including inside the workplace. There are also allegations that he was a serial sexual harasser there. NBC ended up doing an investigation and saying that it found no evidence that any NBC News or Today Show leadership, News HR, or others in positions of authority in the news division received any complaints about Lauer's workplace behavior prior to November 27, 2017. That is the one that ended up leading to his firing. It came from Brooke Nevels, and an accusation that she made became a huge media story. They had an ongoing sexual relationship. That's not in question. And she did reach out to him at times to get together, but she says that he had power over her, and she describes some sexual activity that she says was non-consensual. So it's a rape accusation. In a statement, Matt Lauer said that's not true. It was fully consensual, that her complaints defy common sense, and he said he ended their relationship poorly and that she had tried to rekindle it. Ronan Farrow's book has quotes from her. She spoke with Ronan Farrow for his book. The media took what was in there and ran with it as though it must be true. But the reporting from Ronan Farrow and additional reporting from the media was filled with holes. Later on in the show, I'll talk you through how a website helped bring that information forward, not a major news agency. And then finally, the next year, one person at one major news agency wrote a piece acknowledging that Ronan Farrow definitely failed in basic fact-checking, basic journalism, and in other work he has done. But I want to get straight to some examples for you so you can learn how this works. There used to be this term, you've probably heard it. It's a he said, she said situation. That actually would technically apply here, but it can happen in any gender combination in all kinds of ways. So two people provide very different takes on what something private was like, and they are the only ones who know what it was like. Victim narratives hang over this entire story. Matt Lauer, while he was at NBC, was making huge amounts of money. He was a widely adored star. Brooke Nevels worked elsewhere in the same company, so he was not her boss or in her chain of command, but still he was high-ranking in the same corporation. So a lot of people may start off with an assumption that she is definitely right and he is definitely wrong. But you cannot do that in journalism, ever. When you have cases like this, what do you look for? Here's a big one. Always check the checkable claims. All right, you and I, we cannot know what transpired when these two people were alone. But there are moments in which Brooke Nevels and other women have claimed certain things happening involving other people. When you have descriptions of moments in which something allegedly involved another person, that is checkable with another human being. That stuff is crucial. For example, it can help give you a sense of this person's memories and descriptions and trustworthiness. So here is a clip from the audio version of Catch and Kill.
Nevels bruises easily. Lauer left dark purple marks where he'd forced her legs open. Crying, she ran to the new guy she'd started seeing, a producer who was working in the control room that morning, and told him what had happened.
That is the kind of thing you look for. The new guy she'd started seeing, a producer who was in the control room that morning. Does he say this happened? Ronan Farrow did not reach out to this guy to check. How do we know that? Well, first of all, I'll tell you this. Eventually, as I mentioned, someone at a big news agency did a piece about this. That was Ben Smith at the New York Times. He looked into this and other problems. Here's a clip from that article. The Times had a narrator read some articles, including this one.
Mr. Farrow and the fact-checker for his book, Sean Lavery, never called the new guy to corroborate the story. Both Mr. Lavery and the man told me. I might look at something and say that's good enough. There's enough other evidence that something happened, Mr. Lavery said, speaking hypothetically, when I asked why he and Mr. Farrow didn't call a potentially corroborating witness. But the new guy told me that, in fact, he doesn't remember the scene that was portrayed in the book.
That right there is crazy. I might look at something and say that's good enough. Well, what are you looking at? Find out from the other person if that happened. Anyway, it gets worse. After this piece in the Times, Matt Lauer himself wrote something at a website called Mediaite. I'll tell you why coming up. But in this piece, here's something Matt Lauer wrote. I called that new guy myself, and we spoke by phone for the better part of 2 hours. He was very upset at being referenced, even indirectly, in the book, but he was worried that he would face criticism if he spoke out. But he told me that Brooke did not come crying to see him in the control room to discuss any story of an assault involving me. It didn't happen. In fact, that new guy in Brooke's life told me that he wouldn't have even been in the control room at the time of day. Ronan writes she ran crying to see him. All right, now you might think, okay, fine, but this is something little, right? It's a case of there allegedly being another identifiable person you can check with. And I understand that it can be really hard when there are victim narratives and people start with the belief that something must be true or must be false, but that's not journalism. Ronan Farrow, meanwhile, just doubled down anyway. He told the Times, quote, I'm confident that the conversation took place as described and it was verified in multiple ways. What? If someone said that to me, I'd tell them then you shouldn't be in journalism. What other ways are there to verify that something happened aside from one of the two people who says it never happened? If you have witnesses who saw this happen, then say that and ask the guy why he doesn't remember. But Ronan Farrow has not presented any evidence, and we know he did not even contact the guy. But this is just one thing, right? No. Here's another identifiable person in this passage.
Neville's told, like a million people, about Lauer. She told her inner circle of friends. She told colleagues and superiors at NBC. As in so many of the stories I'd reported on, Neville's told some of them a partial story, skipping over some details. But she was never inconsistent, and she made the seriousness of what had happened clear. When she moved to a new job within the company, working as a producer for Peacock Productions, she reported it to one of her new bosses there.
Here is what Matt Lauer wrote about that. He says it took him 15 minutes to find out who that new boss was. He says he then contacted the woman who ran Peacock Productions at that time. He gave her name, Sharon Scott. She then checked with that new boss and came back to him and said that according to that new boss, the person referenced in the Ronan Farrow book, Brooke Neville's talked about an affair but never said anything about it being non-consensual. And this new boss apparently said that Ronan Farrow never reached out to her. So, again, we have an identifiable person who should have been contacted to ask, did this happen? Speaking of which, coming up, I'll tell you about my efforts to get in touch with all sorts of figures in this story. There's something else that Matt Lauer points to in that passage I just played for you. It's the part in which Ronan quotes Brooke as saying she told like a million people. In the book, she also describes herself as being terrified of being identified as the person who made this accusation against Matt Lauer. So how do you square those two things? Telling like a million people, but also being terrified of being identified? That's a legitimate question, and it's unanswered. Here's another example of what Matt Lauer pointed out. Whatever did happen between him and Brooke Neville's started during Sochi Olympics at their hotel. At the time, Brooke Neville's was living with a boyfriend. Ronan Farrow writes that Brooke Neville's was afraid to take any action against Matt Lauer because Matt Lauer could affect that boyfriend's career. Matt Lauer wrote that he had no authority over the boyfriend, and he spoke to the boyfriend on several occasions for more than 3 hours. He says the guy did not think Matt Lauer had any influence over his career and that Ronan Farrow never contacted him to fact-check anything. The list keeps going. Check this out. In his book, Ronan Farrow quoted a New York Times story. A woman who was not identified said that in 2001, Matt Lauer summoned her to his office and then, as this story puts it, began having intercourse with her. The story says, quote, at some point she said she passed out with her pants pulled halfway down. She woke up on the floor of his office, and Mr. Lauer had his assistant take her to a nurse. So, did the Times, or did Ronan Farrow, when he was quoting that story in his book, try to contact that assistant? According to Matt Lauer, no. He writes, had he called my assistant, she would have told him that she never took anyone to the nurse who had any kind of medical issue while in my office, ever. Now, you might think maybe the assistant doesn't remember these things happening. Maybe these other people don't remember these things happening, but maybe everything Brooke Nevils was claiming is true. Maybe. But you absolutely check this stuff. If the assistant does not remember that happening, then you go back to the person who made the accusation, ask them about it again, see if the story changes, see if there are any records of a person being brought to the nurse on that date. This is the kind of thing you look for. There's one more to tell you about. This is something I noticed when the book came out. I was listening to the audio version, and I was like, does he realize what he just did in that sentence? Because technically, it might not mean what he thinks it means.
Over the course of 2018, I'd learn of 7 claims of sexual misconduct raised by women who worked with Lauer. Most of the women could point to documents or other people they'd told to back up their accounts.
7 claims raised by women who worked with Lauer. Guess what? Those are not 7 complaints about conduct by Matt Lauer. Some of those were complaints about other people. Complaints by women who worked with Lauer. What the hell? That is so obviously misleading. I did an episode about false light invasion of privacy. In that episode, a legal expert explained that something can technically be true but misleading and still count as libel. That line sure seems to me to fit the bill. In interviews, Ronan Farrow admitted that those 7 do not all involve complaints about Matt Lauer. How many of them did, we don't know. Now, you might think, why should we trust Matt Lauer on any of this? We shouldn't blindly trust anyone, but it's not just him. That plus a detail the media went wild over that turned out to be false. Coming up.
And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Josh Levs.
We are blessed to be able to have a speaker this evening who speaks with a lot of heart.
An outstanding author, a principled and groundbreaking journalist, a really engaging speaker and thinker.
Broadcaster, journalist, and host of They Stand Corrected, the podcast fact-checking the news. Thank goodness.
Josh spent 20 years reporting for NPR and CNN, where he developed unique expertise on nonpartisan fact-checking. He has been called Truth Seeker in Chief.
Josh has won multiple Peabody Awards, Murrow Awards,
and awards from the AP, from the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, and more.
His book, All In, was published by HarperCollins and won the Nautilus Gold Award for promoting positive social change. He has spoken to the United Nations, Congress, Google.
And of course, I think is very cool, won a debate at Oxford.
He launched his podcast and newsletter called They Stand Corrected to provide listeners with the truth in a world of disinformation.
Clearly, he is a much-needed voice during these crazy times.
It's my pleasure to introduce Josh Levs to you today.
Please welcome.
Please join me in welcoming Josh Levs.
I love getting out there and meeting people like you. It's such a great opportunity to answer your questions and discover more about listeners to this show and potential listeners too. If you're interested in working out something in person or online, there's a form at my website, joshlevs.com. That's JOSHLEVS.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. Just click bookings. In 2017, Variety reported that former Today Show host Matt Lauer, quote, had a button under his desk that allowed him to lock his door from the inside without getting up. The article said this allowed him to welcome female employees and initiate inappropriate contact while knowing nobody could walk in on him, according to 2 women who were sexually harassed by Lauer. Notice that sentence does not say allegedly. The media went wild over the door locking thing. The Atlantic wrote this: perhaps the single most horrifying detail from the litany of stories alleging sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior by Matt Lauer is his secret button. They cited the Variety story and then wrote, whether it's a mundane precautionary tool or an accessory worthy of a Bond villain, it's also a concrete manifestation of a reality reflected in so many of these recent allegations, the unabridged power and protection that accompany celebrity. The Washington Post also ran a headline about the button. This article said Lauer didn't install the button that enabled him to lock his office door automatically from his desk, it turns out. The mechanism was a standard feature in many of the older offices at 30 Rockefeller Center. And it says that's according to people familiar with the building's operations. But it turns out that button did not allow him to lock the door. That's what he says, and it's what NBC itself ended up saying the next year in a statement. Executive offices have a button that lets them close, not lock, a door. After NBC said that, though, no one seems to have gone back and changed their reporting. Those reports are still up there right now. You might hear all this and think, okay, but still, a bunch of women say he harassed them, and he was having sex at work. He's no victim here. Aha! Victim narratives are the problem, not the solution when it comes to checking facts. It's not about him being a victim. This is about the fact that we, in our society, need trustworthy sources of truth. Those should be news media and nonfiction books. When the media decides who the villain is and who the victim is, in this era, basics of journalism are out the window. That happened here, and that makes the behind-the-scenes story of what happened so telling. It's time for me to introduce a guy whose voice you heard at the top of this show. His name is John Ziegler. He wrote columns for a website called Mediaite. That is a site that analyzes the media, especially its intersection with politics. John Ziegler had been on the Today Show a few times and had combative interviews with Matt Lauer. So these two were very much not friends. After Ronan Farrow's book came out, unlike the media that operates just so blindly, John Ziegler was willing to question publicly whether these accusations were accurate. He still publicly described Lauer in some negative terms. In one of his early columns about this, he said, based on a conversation he had had with someone, he had the impression that Lauer was a notorious womanizing cad who inappropriately used his position of extreme power to seduce multiple women in the business into affairs. But still, Ziegler was willing to look at the possibility that Ronan Farrow was wrong. Matt Lauer ended up agreeing to meet with him off the record. John Ziegler told me about that.
When we first began speaking, Matt wouldn't even open Ronan Farrow's book. He was that disgusted by him. He literally had trouble with me having the book on the table at his house in the Hamptons when we first met. He literally didn't even want to look at it. And then eventually he and I would go through it literally line by line, word for word.
John tells me there are also details that Farrow got wrong. One of Ronan Farrow's devices in this book is to include all kinds of details, like what a person was wearing on any given day, what a piece of stationery looked like. It makes you feel, oh, he must really have his facts down. It imbues trust. So, like he says, the hotel suite in Sochi was massive, and Matt Lauer was like, no, it's not how I remembered it. So Matt Lauer actually called the hotel to check, and no, it was just a regular hotel suite, apparently. But John Ziegler said he told him to just avoid all that because no one would care. But John says there are big problems that would be very telling that Matt Lauer did not report in his column.
What Matt ended up writing in Mediaite was the tip of the iceberg of the malpractice that Ronan Farrow committed. There were a lot of stories that in order to protect identities of people and not get other people in trouble, and also for space and time constraints, that never made it into Matt's public response. I mean, some of the best stuff to me was never made public.
So how did anything here become public at all? John says he and Matt Lauer ended up basically working together, spending more than 100 hours total talking over time. Eventually, John says, Matt decided to go public in Mediaite. And the website itself took an important action. At the top of this column, the website put a note saying its editors, quote, independently fact-checked the accounts of the 4 witnesses/subjects Lauer spoke with and cites in this piece. All confirmed that Lauer's account of their conversations was accurate. So, this website that you might not have heard of if you're not involved in media stuff the way I am, they did what none of the major media bothered to do. That is a powerful sign of what's going on with big mainstream media. Here's what John says about that.
This story, among many others, is the perfect proof that the news media is completely broken and that narratives that are popular or that create fear, and this one created a lot of fear and create perverse self-interest within the media itself, are never going to get debunked. No one was going to stand up for Matt because no one had any self-interest in doing so. So everyone was either going to stay silent or they were going to back Ronan Farrow, who's the new golden child. And once a narrative, especially in this area of sexual assault, is created, there's almost no going back in the modern media. It's completely broken in general, but on this particular subject, it's catastrophically broken.
John also points out something significant that no major media have reported on since then. NBC, at the time, announced that they were waiving any NDAs that women may have signed. So, any women who had bad experiences with Matt Lauer could come forward with the truth.
And guess what happened? Crickets. Nothing. No lawsuits. No interviews, despite a media that was thirsty, hungry for people to tell this story. Not one person. Matt Lauer has never been sued by anybody in this situation.
Of course, a lack of legal action and public interviews does not automatically tell you what happened, but prominent people in the media had been calling for those NDAs to be waived and for women to come forward. And there hasn't been any prominent news coverage of the fact that no one came forward publicly. That is also part of the story. Coming up, what Ronan Farrow has said about all this. Man, this episode has flown by. I have so much more to tell you about, so I'm going to pick this up in the next episode and talk you through more of it. Like Youngism, I thought I'd have time for that today, but there's too much to talk about here. Also, how the media responded to Matt Lauer's statements. You know what the story is like? It's like the media is this giant building which has a really fancy sheen and looks all impressive from the outside. But this story is a window. You crack it open, you look inside, and you see what a complete toxic mess it is internally. There's so much that's so wrong that no one is cleaning up. I'll also tell you about something I wrote at the time about how NBC, of course, had the right to fire Matt Lauer. Also, I'll tell you about an event I did in New York with the awesome Tarana Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, and something important that she said. But for now, I'll tie up this episode by telling you this. I have reached out to Ronan Farrow through his publisher, Brooke Neville through her attorney, reached out to Matt Lauer. I reached out to a woman you heard mentioned earlier who had run Peacock Productions. No one is commenting publicly. But if that changes, I will be happy to speak with them for this show. In his book, Ronan Farrow claimed that it was fact-checked. After Matt Lauer published his column, Ronan Farrow tweeted just that Matt Lauer is wrong. He didn't provide any specifics. He didn't say why Matt Lauer is wrong. Nothing. And one more note that I'll leave you with here. The New York Times piece pointed this out. When Harvey Weinstein was about to face trial, Ronan tweeted that a source involved in the Weinstein trial was telling him that close to 50 potential jurors had been sent home because they had read his book, Catch and Kill. The court reporter who actually tracks this stuff said that that was ridiculous. And a reporter in the room said it wasn't 50 jurors, it was 2. I have reached out to get my own confirmation of this based on records from the time, and I will let you know next week. But here's what's so significant. Even with all that information, Farrow still said he was standing by his source who gave that figure of 50. This all speaks to victim narratives and the media's willingness to look the other way when it wants to believe something. Speaking of all that, in the newsletter, you'll see one of my latest takedowns on the media's insanity involving Israel, treating Hamas claims as fact. That speaks to victim narratives, as the media has cast Israel as villain, so why bother to engage in any basic rules? This is how journalistic disasters happen all the time, and it's why the news media needs to be structured from the ground up based on truth to give you what you deserve. As always, I would love to hear from you. You know there are 2 ways to contact me. The best way is through the newsletter, and the other way is through a form at my website. Let me know what you think. Let me know your questions. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.